Hey guys, Eric and Joey here to talk about a huge episode of Walking Dead. In general, you know there are spoilers on this, but if you haven't seen the episode Killer Within, don't keep listening.
Go away now.
Go away
Get
now.
inside.
Because our first reaction to this episode is pretty much, holy shit. Would you agree?
I think that's the accurate statement for this episode.
Yeah, people complain about the pace of Walking Dead last year, and you might think this is episode 4. Maybe this would be a little quieter time at the prison. No quiet time. Huge events happen that I think you'd usually see in a season finale, or at least the mid-season finale here.
Yeah, some very big stuff. I mean, first and foremost, the prison overrun.
And it was a little interesting, the who let the zombies in. I feel like they tricked us a little bit in that second episode, because it pretty much was implied here that Andrew did it all. Andrew, the guy who Rick left to die, because someone in prison garb we saw let those zombies in at the beginning, and then we see that Andrew's kind of hiding out and has turned on the sirens at the end.
Turned on the sirens, the generators, just made hell for Rick Grimes and company.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, it's a little funky because they played a trick on us, and we always assumed that it was, I think at the time we assumed it was maybe one of the governor's cronies or something that was going to come in a future episode, but now it seems it's all connected. Yeah,
so now you basically have to think that in that second episode, he was left to die by Rick, screamed bloody murder, but actually got away and then hid out in the woods and watched Carol performing the C-section on a zombie.
And enacted his revenge.
After that. We'll let it go though, because what happened here in this episode was so intense.
Yeah, this was a really intense episode. I really enjoyed. I had mixed feelings on the episode overall.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed everything that Rick had to deal with in terms of the zombie attack, and even just in terms of the horror movie vibe. That scene with T-Dog and Carol racing through the tunnels and the lights flashing on and off. It's really intense and one of the better done scenes of this season so far.
You mentioned T-Dog.
I did.
And, it's like we joked about it for so long. It's like, T-Dog, what is he doing? Give the guy a storyline or kill him. I have to say something funny was, I take notes because I reviewed the show for IGN, so I put notes about how, hey, T-Dog's got some stuff to do, because when he was arguing with Rick, I felt it was the most, character he was showing, because he was really taking a stand on his own, giving his arguments for why they should let the prisoners join them. And then it did feel like kind of a joke, a cruel, silly joke that he then dies in this episode.
And that was my main problem with this episode in general, is that it seems like they've killed off the characters that they didn't know what to do with, or things that weren't working. They were just like, screw it, let's just kill them and move on, which to me is a problem.
I did think it was handled a little strangely in this episode. It almost would have been better, like I said, if T-Dog didn't have any of that stuff at the top of the episode and just got killed. It's like, okay, they're just getting rid of him. And then Carol was a little weird because she got killed off screen and we didn't really see, and yes, there'll be future episodes to deal with it, but at this time we didn't really get to see Daryl's reaction, when obviously that relationship's been pretty important on the show. Yeah,
that's the thing. She was killed off screen, and they had spent the previous episodes besides the last week's Woodbury episode, building her up more. Making her more integral to the group.
Yeah, so it's a little strange how they handled that. Although on the other hand, I will say, you have to say this is certainly another episode that reminds you, people will die left and right.
No one is safe.
Yeah. No one is safe. Before we get to sort of the big death, let's briefly talk about the Woodbury aspect of this episode, because they did go there. It was interesting because, we talked last week about how Merle was such an extreme 180 from what we knew last time. This was a little more old Merle here. Because
they reference old Merle.
They reference old Merle. He's a little skeevy with Andrea, which I think is probably appropriate. I think, we can't have the Merle we met in season 1 if we're going to be with him all the time, but at least remind us of what he was like. And so this, I think, touched upon what a lot of people assumed, which is the governor sort of saving him, and the fact that he has this Wookiee life debt, if you will, to the governor.
And that's the thing, is that he was skeevy with Andrea, but then the scene with him and the governor where he wants to go find Daryl is actually kind of like you're kind of sympathizing with him. It's weird because I hate the guy, but still.
Right, it's a nice middle ground, I guess, that they're kind of coming to. Growing pains to get there, to go from such a transition, but slowly starting to work. And then we have Michonne starting to do a little detective work. And investigate the fact that there are bullet holes and blood on these military vehicles.
Yeah, and of course, fans of the comics know there's a history between the governor and Michonne. I don't know if they'll go that route in the show, but they're building that conflict. Like, Michonne's the one that is onto him. And knows what he's doing.
Right. While Andrea is kind of drinking the Kool-Aid, as it were, and wants to stick around. But obviously, as much as that was some interesting little stuff, everything was overshadowed by the prison. And it all led to Lori going into labor, which on one hand, it's the old dramatic sort of cliche of the woman goes into labor at the worst possible time. But look, it worked as far as being like, oh my God, you know, could things get worse? And now she's going into labor.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of the way that she went out and the fact that we never really got a redemption for her, especially at the end of that first episode where we talked about, you know, her and Rick seemed to like be working toward patching up their relationship, but now that's all out the window. But I do like the consequences that we'll see from her death, you know, how that impacts Carl, because obviously his innocence is completely just gone at this point.
Yeah.
And Rick, as we see at the end of the episode, just is a complete mess.
Yeah, it was, the whole thing I did think was handled pretty well, very intense. I mean, you don't get more intense than Maggie slicing open her belly and how that all went out. And I thought it was fairly touching, especially as someone who didn't like Lori very much. I thought they handled her and Carl's goodbyes well. Yeah. I could have done without. It's one of those little things where I didn't like the little flashback to Rick and Carl. It kind of took me out of the moment a little bit.
I enjoyed that, actually.
Yeah.
So
we
should fight after.
We should fight afterwards about it. But I did think overall, though, I thought it all worked. And then certainly, the end with like Rick realizing she's gone. A great Walking Dead visual of him laying on the ground in anguish, surrounded by zombies they just had to kill.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And it was pretty wrenching.
It's a very intense episode. I mean, my problems for the reasons behind it are, I guess, my own maybe, but it was intense, and I do like the impact it could have on the characters moving forward. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they've cleaned house. I mean, it's like they've dealt a little bit, you know, it's been a little bit clumsy getting there because they've been dealing with past mistakes, and it hasn't always been smooth to deal with those past mistakes. But I think now going forward, especially with the way they've reset things, gotten rid of characters who were complaints about, it is kind of a whole new world. Overall, I did think it was a great episode, those little qualms aside about some of the ways that they handled things. But let us know what you thought in the comments. Certainly a lot to talk about. Were you shocked that this happened so early in the season? And what do you think is going to happen next? We'll be back next week. Thanks, guys.